Tonight, an historic indictment. Former President Donald Trump may be facing dozens of business fraud charges.
This is a political prosecution and persecution.
That's what's scary to me. Nobody's above the law.
How Texas lawmakers are responding to the indictment. Plus, should librarians be prosecuted for the books they allow to be checked out?
It's going to reduce the amount of materials that are getting into students' hands.
Why a proposal to give parents more power over school libraries has some educators concerned. And later, wrapping up Women's History Month, why some members of Congress are pushing to add a new Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. Capitol Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. We're learning more about the historic indictment of former President Donald Trump. He may be facing more than 30 counts of business fraud charges tied to hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. He's expected to be back in New York next week to face those charges. Torian Small has more from Washington.
A new volley in the war of words between Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Manhattan District Attorney. The DA's general counsel firing off a scathing 6-page letter on Friday to 3 House Republican chairmen, branding their attacks on the office's investigation of former President Donald Trump baseless and inflammatory.
They said it's an improper and dangerous usurpation of the executive and judicial functions. Do you agree with the general counsel's assessment there?
I can see why general counsel would make that interpretation of the request that's been given to them based on where these people sit, the party that they're associated with, and that individual is entitled to make that interpretation, much like the people who head up these committees are entitled to ask for certain information.
The fiery response came the morning after Trump was indicted by a Manhattan grand jury. The DA has been investigating alleged hush money payments during the 2016 campaign to hide Trump's alleged affair with an adult movie star. Trump has denied the affair and any wrongdoing. The former president is reportedly facing more than 30 counts. Unprecedented, former Assistant U.S. Attorney David Weinstein says.
I think, Torian, we're all standing, at the edge of history that's been made, and we're all present to sit here and watch it again.
In the letter, the DA counsel told the chairman, quote, "You and many of your colleagues have chosen to collaborate with Mr. Trump's efforts to vilify and denigrate the integrity of elected state prosecutors and trial judges." But on the Hill, Republicans are in lockstep in their disapproval of the indictment, even though the charges and evidence have not been made public. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tweeting, "Alvin Bragg has irreparably damaged our country in an attempt to interfere in our presidential election. Democrats say the indictment is proof no one is above the law."
This is the true foundation of our system of government that's based on the rule of law. And I really hope that that is where these arguments are played out and not in the halls of Congress or in the political sphere.
Trump is reportedly expected to be arraigned in a New York criminal court on Tuesday. The indictment is expected to be unsealed at that time. In Washington, Torian Small, Capitol Tonight.
The reaction to Trump's indictment has been fast and furious from Texas politicians. In a tweet, Governor Greg Abbott said, quote, "Weaponization of our courts for political grievances is an abhorrent abuse of power." Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante has more on how Texas Republicans and Democrats in Congress are reacting.
Ronnie Jackson in the White House, they said, "This guy is brilliant."
The Texas Republicans, whom former President Donald Trump thanked during his rally in Waco last weekend, immediately came to his defense after the news broke Thursday that a Manhattan grand jury had indicted the former president. Congressman Ronnie Jackson tweeting, "This is a dark day in American history." Although the Manhattan District Attorney has not yet released the charges, Texas Republicans have been quick to call it political persecution. And one lawmaker tells Spectrum News it isn't too soon to say so.
Do you really believe that if Donald Trump had never been a political figure, that this DA would have brought these particular charges? I think the answer to that is obvious. Absolutely not. So this is a politically motivated attempt to really weaponize the justice system.
He's my guy.
Congressman Troy Nehls tweeted, "Real America knows this is all a sham." And Congressman Michael Burgess said on Twitter, "The justice system should never be used for political grandstanding."
How did we go?
Senator Ted Cruz recorded what he called a, quote, "emergency podcast" to respond.
This indictment is utter and complete garbage. This is not law. This is not a prosecution based on the facts. This is a political vendetta brought by a left-wing partisan Democrat.
I've known Governor DeSantis for about a decade.
And even though Congressman Chip Roy is endorsing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis over Trump for president, he tweeted, "DA lets New York City turn into a crime hellhole and then abuses authority." No surprise, the reaction to the indictment is dividing exactly along party lines. Some Texas Democrats echoed what we've heard nationally from their party, that no one is above the law.
No former president should be immune from going before a jury if there's sufficient evidence found by police and prosecutors.
Because the most
Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro, who played a key role in the second impeachment of Trump, tweeted, "May justice be served finally." In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
And we want to bring in our reporter roundtable now to further discuss the political implications for Trump. Rena Diamante joins us from Washington, and here in studio with me is John Moritz of the USA Today Network. Good to see you both. Rena, I know we just heard from you in the story that you put together, and Trump was just here for his first campaign rally in Waco. His first campaign rally of 2024. He railed against the possibilities of this indictment. I mean, how much does this just further become his rally cry?
I think we'll certainly continue to hear him continue to say this. I mean, it was notable that he picked Texas as the site of his first campaign rally. The state has the most electoral votes compared to any other state behind the Democratic-led California. And you heard President Trump being incredibly defiant. He was saying to supporters there that they would be vindicated. You saw all these signs that said witch hunt, for example. Now, there were a number of investigations that were tracking, not just the Manhattan DA's one. And you heard President Trump try to frame those probes as a way to kind of maintain his status as the frontrunner.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of a number of legal issues that the former president faces. I mean, how much do you think this indictment emboldens his supporters? I mean, do they stick with him?
Well, that's the real $64,000 question, to use an old phrase. It does two things. It might energize those hardcore Republicans who back Trump, but it also might give pause to those who are saying, enough with the drama, enough with this. We like some of the things you did, but all of this baggage that you keep bringing to the campaigns, that it keeps piling up. It almost reminds me of a dozen or so years ago, where Hillary Clinton was the front runner, but so many people worried about the baggage that she kept bringing in.
Yeah, Rena, how likely is it that these charges turn off any Republicans? I mean, you heard and you spoke to several and recently spoke with Congressman Chip Roy, who I know we just heard from in your story as well. He endorsed Ron DeSantis over Trump, but yet he's still saying that this is not the way to go with what happened to Trump.
Yeah, you're seeing largely Texas Republicans in the delegation fall in line and go to former President Trump's defense. I think there are some Texas Republicans who are sort of waiting to see how the presidential race shapes up in terms of who they're going to endorse for the nomination. And when I spoke to Congressman Roy, he was careful not to lean in too much into the criticism of former President Trump, rather talking up Governor DeSantis. I think what's also interesting is that among the comments that we heard, it was Senator Cornyn who basically said that he thought that this Manhattan DA wanted to get publicity. And so certainly Senate Republicans have a different relationship with the former president than that of House Republicans from Texas.
Yeah, some good points there. I mean, what do you think this means, John, for Trump's 2024 rivals? I mean, we're talking about DeSantis, I mean, but how do they navigate this if DeSantis does indeed get in?
I think the way Rena mentioned Chip Roy's reaction, you deplore the DA, but again, you say I speak to several of the policies that the former president wants to bring in. I have a clean slate. With me, it's a fresh start, and it's about issues, not about personalities.
Rena, what about Democrats? How do they navigate this?
Well, we heard from President Biden. He was asked a lot about this, actually, and he said that he was, not going to make a comment. So the response from the White House has been pretty subdued, pretty muted. I think that they're waiting to see what exactly these charges are when that gets released on Tuesday. And so far, Texas Democrats, I think that they're also holding back a little bit in a way from their response. I mean, I did speak to Congressman Kassar. You heard him in the piece, and he just basically said that no one is above the law. And we also heard from Congressman Castro, who tweeted, you know, he was a major person in the Trump second impeachment, and he said maybe finally justice will be served.
John, lastly, real quickly, I mean, you can respond to how you think Democrats will navigate this, but also when Trump, how do you think he will react to his arrest and just turning himself in? What do you think that's going to look like next week?
Well, we've seen a couple of examples in Texas with former Governor Perry when he was indicted. He basically looked almost smiling in his defiance, and of course, way before that was Tom DeLay. Kind of pioneered the smiling mugshot. One thing on the Democrats thing is they don't want to feed into this is a partisan narrative, and also if your enemy is about to hang himself, why would you take the rope from him?
Yeah. John, Rena, we will all obviously be watching this very closely. Thank you to both of you. And let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines across the state. Texans could lose their voter registration if they don't vote in consecutive federal elections. A state Senate committee approved legislation aiming to do that Thursday. Texans who don't vote in 2 consecutive federal elections would be placed on a suspense list, and their registration could be canceled if they don't mail back a voter registration certificate. The bill now heads to the full Senate. 3 staff members of Houston area State Representative Yolanda Jones have resigned, accusing Jones of creating an abusive and hostile work environment. The Texas Tribune reports Jones' chief of staff, legislative director, and district director wrote a letter saying Jones regularly told staff to do work unrelated to state business and threatened to fire them. Speaker Dade Phelan's office says it will review the complaints. Several civil rights organizations filed a complaint with the Department of Education to stop the Texas government's takeover of Houston ISD. They're also calling on the Justice Department to investigate possible voting rights violations, since the takeover would also replace locally elected school board members. And still to come on Capitol tonight, parental guidance required. How state lawmakers are trying to give parents more control over what their kids can check out of the school library. And later, a stalemate over spending, where Congress and the White House stand on budget negotiations in Washington. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. This week at the state capitol, much of the conversation about education was focused on library books. A Senate bill being debated would allow parents to have more control over what their student can check out from their school library. Our Charlotte Scott reports.
Arresting librarians. Soon, they could be charged for distributing potentially obscene material to a minor if a bill by North Texas Senator Angela Paxton passes. It would remove protection for people who give out books for scientific or educational reasons if some find those books harmful. That worries the Texas Library Association.
Anyone who has a problem with a book, who doesn't agree with the book that has been brought into the school by the school board or the school library council, would be able to call law enforcement on the librarian.
The bill would also establish a local school library advisory council, create a process for parents to challenge library material, and allow parents to opt in to receive notice every time their student checks out a book.
It's going to place a really heavy administrative burden on a librarian to notify a parent every single time a book is checked out.
There are plenty of administrators who can handle the role of making sure that parents get the notice that they deserve.
Mary Elizabeth Castle is with the conservative organization Texas Values. She supports the bill because it would expand parental rights, a top priority for Republicans this legislative session.
Kids have these access to these books without any type of supervision, and I think a parent has the ultimate parental rights to know what their child is bringing home and reading.
A letter about inappropriate books in schools sent by a former Republican representative spurred challenges to children's books, specifically regarding race and sexuality. Since then, lawmakers and parents have joined in by trying to remove certain books from school libraries, and there's been an increase in investigations into librarians.
To have your professionalism questioned by a small vocal minority of individuals is really threatening, and librarians do not feel safe working in their schools and in their communities right now.
While some see the need to track and remove books, others don't. various schools and stores have created banned book clubs to push back.
We have to remember that every family has a different set of values, and just because your values aren't those of your neighbors, it doesn't mean that your neighbors' values are wrong.
The debate about what children should and shouldn't be able to pull from school libraries is bound to continue. For Capital Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
For more on this, I spoke with Carol Harrod earlier this week. He's a lecturer on library and information studies at Texas Women's University and spent 2 decades working with librarians in Texas. Here's his take on how this could affect librarians and schools.
I think that what people need to realize is there are lots of implications to several of the bills that are in the Texas House right now. What I don't want to see is criminalization of librarians and library work. What we need to do is champion librarians because they are information professionals. They have criteria for selection and acquisition of materials. And these are the same people who've always been reading to your children, the same people who have been helping you with information needs for decades. It's just the attitudes have changed about librarians, and they're not an evil cabal of people who are trying to, groom your children. Sure. They are information professionals, and they want to do what's right by their community.
Well, and what do you think this will mean for librarians if this does pass, and how they do their jobs?
Well, it's going to have a chilling effect. There's no doubt about that. If you are threatening librarians, or some of the bills right now are threatening publishers. They're making publishers label books, and what does that do if you've got a label on a book? And you have a child check it out, and it's got the label that also labels the child, and that speaks to privacy, and it speaks to voluntary inquiry, which children have the right to in school libraries.
Republicans say this is about protecting kids, allowing parents to know what their kids are reading, having access. I mean, what kind of access is there already to that? Because they can go in and say that they want a book removed, right?
Sure, there are procedures in place, and there have been. I was on reconsideration committees when I was a practicing librarian, so there are tools in place. Approach your librarian. If you have a problem with a book, or if you think it needs to be recategorized or removed, there is a process in place, and there's a committee that will consider this. You won't always get the result that you want. The book may not always be recategorized or removed, but your voice will be heard. And so I would tell people to work through the process, contact their librarians, and just work through it because it's there for people to use.
Lastly, what do you think this will mean for providing materials for a wide range of students?
Well, that's part of what we teach in library school. If you come to Texas Women's University, there is a whole graduate level class called Collection Development and Management. So that teaches people the principles of having a diverse collection, of avoiding censorship, of how to select and acquire materials, and to make sure that there's something for everybody. And I love that about libraries. Everything has a space and a place. And so, your religion section, all the religions live side by side, all the countries live side by side. So, that's the kind of library I want, and really the kind of world I want to live in, where everybody has a voice and everybody's story is heard.
Still to come on Capitol Tonight, the push for equal rights. How some members of Congress are giving new momentum to a fight that started a century ago. Welcome back. Negotiations over avoiding a default on the country's credit limit are stalled. So House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is signaling Republicans may forge their own bill to raise the debt ceiling if they can't come to an agreement with the White House. Both McCarthy and President Biden say they are willing to meet, but the White House has made it clear they will not approve a plan that cuts programs like Social Security or Medicare. The U.S. is expected to meet the debt limit sometime this summer. As Women's History Month comes to an end, members of Congress are launching a new push to add the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. Cassie Simeon of our Washington Bureau explains how a new group in Congress is hoping to make it happen.
So today, we are making it absolutely damn clear that this must be a national issue. You might have written us out, but don't count us out.
That's right. A century after the Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced, it has yet to become part of the Constitution.
It is incredibly demoralizing, given all the contributions of women in this country, despite the many disparities and disparate outcomes and inequities and injustices, to not see ourselves reflected in the founding document of this country. It is so demoralizing. We're deserving of recognition, and we're deserving of our constitutional equality.
Some women on Capitol Hill are hoping to change that, launching the Congressional Caucus for the Equal Rights Amendment. Proposed amendments need approval of 2/3 of the House and Senate and ratification by 3/4 of the states. The House and Senate passed the ERA by the necessary margins in 1972, but it did not win the backing of enough states until 2020, decades past the 1982 deadline, when Virginia became the 38th state to support it. Last year, House Democrats introduced a resolution to formally recognize the ERA as part of our nation's founding document. President Joe Biden has also backed congressional action to pass the constitutional amendment, but that bill went nowhere.
All we're asking for is 24 words, 24 simple words. The Equal Rights Amendment will add to our Constitution that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
But the effort to make the ERA the 28th Amendment to the Constitution faces an uphill battle in a divided Congress. It's unclear if the measure will be called up for a vote in the Republican-controlled House, and earlier this month, a group of Republican senators introduced a resolution that would require the ratification process to begin all over again. In Washington, Cassie Simeon, Spectrum News.
And that is going to do it for this edition of Capitol Tonight. We're back on Monday with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay safe and have a great weekend.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.